Thank you so much for inviting me to give this presentation on impact evaluation of active labor market policies. If I could have my slides, it would be even greater. It's been really a pleasure to be here and discuss with you these different topics on active labor market policies over these 2 days. And my presentation indeed gives some examples of impact evaluations and particularly some key dimensions to pay attention to when conducting impact evaluations on active labor market policies. And just before going to the impact evaluations, just to give an overview what our team in the OECD does on active labor market policies and public employment services. So there's a lot of cross-country policy advice. So this can include data analysis, but also really facilitating sharing best practices among countries. And as you see, the topics are the key topics we also discuss here today. So this is universal a bit. Of course, past 2 years have been really focused on the effects of COVID-19 on the labor market and how to mitigate these effects by public employment services. But many of the other topics, of course, have been there already for years, but might have accelerated or gained even more importance during the COVID crisis, such as aiming at inclusive labor markets so that nobody's left behind, digitalization in public employment services, and so on. And another big part of our work is really focusing on individual countries, so helping individual countries to improve their policies and public employment services. So it can be really a technical support, so aiming at helping in implementation, particularly if we talk about projects that are funded by DG Reform in the European Commission. And very related to that is indeed the work on impact evaluation of active labor market policies, so the focus of my presentation today. And this can involve conducting the analysis, but also setting up experiments that Marco Caliendo just previously talked about, as well as assessing the frameworks for impact evaluations in public employment service, for example. And one specific project we have on impact evaluations that is really giving a framework to study this aspect in quite a few countries is our project with the European Commission, so DG Employment in this case, and it builds on cooperation with the European Commission and actually their joint research center. And it's actually also building on a previous phase with the same partners where we try to map the situation regarding linking administrative data and potentially survey data to conduct impact evaluations on active labor market policies. And what we saw, many countries or many public employment services, many labor ministries do not really systematically yet link the data to conduct impact evaluations. So this project really aims to build this capacity in public employment services and also ministries of labor to, on the one hand, build this capacity to actually link the data, and then also the analytical capacity in the institutions to conduct impact evaluations. And then, as a side product, also to actually see what works and for whom, so actually conduct these evaluations. And at the moment, we have quite a few countries participating in this project. I'm sorry, but these are wrong slides. But anyway, it gives the content. There's Lithuania, Greece, Finland, Ireland, Portugal, participating within this project that is financed by the Commission, but additionally similar content also for our project with Canada. That is additionally, but I would really like more actual slides, if it's possible. Maybe they haven't reached. So, just to give content of these projects, it's really about evaluating the different policies, but also setting up, yes, and also actually assessing the frameworks for monitoring and evaluation framework. So how countries, if they already do impact evaluations, how they do it, what are the possibilities to improve the framework for the future. Maybe I continue with some thoughts while the slides hopefully are coming. Also yesterday at the conference dinner table, I was asked, so what policies work? It's of course a simple question, but it doesn't really provide us the full advice for policies, right? It's not only about what policies work, it's really about what policies work for whom. So we have to always look at the subgroups, dig deeper when you evaluate policies. If the slides are coming here, then you will see one little example from our project with Lithuania, where we evaluate the effectiveness of vocational training provided by the Public Employment Service, and we see that 24 months after starting the training, these people have, on average, 7% higher probability to be in employment than otherwise similar people. So as Marco just talked earlier, then this is the matching method to see the effectiveness of a policy. But when we look more into subgroups, we see that there are, of course, quite big differences when we break the effect down by, for example, age. So we see that people in the old age groups have effectiveness maybe or even beyond 10 percentage points, and even more so when we break the effect down by, for example, education level, then we see that low educated people actually benefit from this training a lot, while the effects for people with lower education, higher education, then more modest effects. Can anybody give me a signal if slides are coming, or should I just continue without slides? I can just continue. So hopefully the slides will reach you after the conference, the latest, unfortunately. Yeah. So another point I wanted to make is about looking beyond employment probability. It's probably quite usual as public employment services to think about the fast integration of our clients, so job seekers. But of course it matters also what kind of jobs these people get actually, so job quality, other dimensions of their integration. So for example, what we have looked at, of course, wage can be an indication how good the job potentially is, but also, for example, occupational mobility. So when we look at the data, then we see that in general, people who have experienced unemployment, they are more likely to integrate to jobs that in general have lower market value and less of them integrate to jobs that have higher market value. So for example, we have looked at this by looking at the classification of occupations, so ISCA codes, looking at the data across all employed people on a labor market, and then giving them an index based on the wage, and then looking at the distribution of employed people on the labor market, and then you can do the similar exercise for unemployed people, the jobs they integrate to. And of course, we can then evaluate whether this distribution changes. So when we see the distribution of people exiting unemployment, then compare it with for people who have actually been through an active labor market policy. And again, thinking about the comparability, so not all unemployed, but similar unemployed. Maybe one more point about evaluating what a public employment service does. So there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of literature, and a lot of examples also just seen before about evaluating specific measures or specific services. But it's much more that the public employment service does. So all kind of different approaches, processes, and also, for example, digital tools. So we also want that all these tools, approaches would have actually beneficial effects on the labor market. So what we do actually works and is cost efficient. Wow, I see my slides on the screen. Found. Amazing. So this is the example on the importance of looking into subgroups, as it's really important input for policy making, but also policy implementation, so how we can target the measures better. This was about occupational mobility. So this is, for example, here, a distribution of jobs in Lithuania for whole labor market, and then we compare it where the unemployed people enter, then we see that indeed the distribution changes, and with the intervention of active labor market policy, we hopefully could bring the distribution back to the more similar to the labor market. And back to where I was. So it's important that, for example, if we have a digital tool that should support job seekers find more matching jobs, better jobs, then of course we want to see that actually it is the case, so it helps the job seeker. And when we actually look what is going on with these digital tools that look fascinating, then often what we measure is for example, satisfaction of the job seeker, user, counselor, so whoever is the user of the tool, and maybe take up. But not so often we think about measuring whether this tool also has actually impact on the labor market outcomes. And that's actually what should be actually addressed more, hopefully, in the public employment services. So here is one good example from the Spanish public employment service, SEPE. They developed a tool that helps counselors to recommend jobs for the job seekers, so those jobs that are more likely producing faster or better labor market integration, as well as recommending training. And before rolling it out nationally, this tool is evaluated, and we help them to evaluate this tool. And how it's done, it's experimental method that just also Marco touched upon. So this is sort of the gold standard of evaluating impact. it's really, of course, not always feasible, but whenever it is feasible, this is something we should be thinking about to really credibly evaluate a policy, or in this case, a tool. And in this case, the randomization is done on the councillor level, so about 500 councillors are then using this tool when they counsel job seekers, and another 500 do not use this tool. And this trial, the core part of the trial then lasted 6 months, so ended in the end of December, and now presently we are just starting to access the data about this trial and starting the evaluation. On the one hand, to understand the effectiveness of this tool, but again also hoping that similar evaluations will kick off more in the future, including in the Spanish Public Employment Service. My last slide, just to highlight something that the Minister of Health and Labour also yesterday touched upon, so some analysis that we conducted on Estonian data, and it was launched a year ago. And just to show that, of course, linking administrative data and potentially survey data goes way beyond the needs of impact evaluations. Of course, it's necessary for service delivery, so operational needs, but of course, other types of knowledge generation. In the Estonian case, we were lucky to actually link more than 20 data from more than 20 registers, and then we were really able to see, for example, what kind of groups on the labor market are weakly attached, but have the potential to integrate to the labor market in case they could be supported or supported better. So, for example, at the moment they are not within the reach of public employment service. And those who are registered with the public employment service, what kind of measures do they get, and do these measures potentially correspond to their employment obstacles? It's a bit difficult figure, but hopefully it shows that people who have health-related employment obstacle as their core obstacle also tend to get health-related active labor market policies more, and we can say the same about people who have geographic obstacles, so they live in a remote area where jobs are far away and they don't even have a vehicle in their household, so they are really maybe a bit cut off from the labor market, and they also get then related measures more than the groups whose main employment obstacle is not related to geographic location. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna, and I'm so sorry with miscommunication with the slides, but we also have Marko with us, so Marko will do a little conclusion of his presentation, and then it's your chance to ask some questions from Marko and Anna as well, so please stay with us. And Marko, I hope that you are with us.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks. I mean, sorry to be offline for a couple of seconds, but actually it was quite interesting because everything Anna was telling, I mean, it's like it's just showing that there's already a lot of progress in that direction, how we can estimate, you know, causal impacts and how we can implement them. Let me just say, I mean, Anna mentioned that experiments are the gold standard, and that's absolutely true. But I just also want to emphasize that with the methods I presented, you can actually get quite close, or you can even have the same quality of causal impacts than with experience. Let me just briefly mention, like the final slide I had on the methods. This was this regression discontinuity design. And the idea here is basically that sometimes we have like these cut-offs implemented in our labor laws. For example, in Austria, it was that in 1989, the government increased the potential unemployment benefit duration from 30 to 39 weeks for individuals 40 and older at the time of job separation. Yeah, so basically everyone who was 40 or older had 39 weeks of potential benefit duration. Everyone who was up to 39 years only had 30 weeks of potential benefit duration. And this regression discontinuity design then compares basically people who are just above the cutoff with people who are just below the cutoff. Yeah? And so it's very similar to experiments also. It's a very nice way if you can't run experiments, and you get also very nice effects here. Let me just briefly summarize, because I also want to leave some time for questions to me and also to Anna. So basically, we all want to do evidence-based labor market policy, and therefore we need to ensure a successful program evaluation. And basically, my advice is to involve the evaluators as early as possible, and already plan the evaluation method while designing the project. A very important lessons that we have learned, and that's already also implemented in many of the things that Anna presented, is that better data helps us a lot. Yeah, so the combination of different data sources, for example, administrative and survey data, can be very helpful in many situations. But also, in order to set that up, this may take time. Yeah, so if you want to run a survey, you need to design the survey, you need to do a baseline survey, you need to do a follow-up survey. So this will take time. So also getting like causal impacts will take time. So most likely this will not be done, let's say 6 months after the program has finished, because usually you are also interested like in the long-term effect. And if you design new programs, then it may also be useful to directly also think about collecting new data specifically for the program evaluation. And so what I have learned in the last 20 years, I would say it's very important to be opportunistic and prioritize. Because basically you can do anything, but you can't do everything, and you certainly can't do everything at once. Yeah. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you don't know anything about the functioning of a program, then learning something very simple can be very powerful for you. But without serious, long-standing research partnerships between policymakers, academics, and other stakeholders, we can make very little progress in terms of, delivering really evidence-based labor market policies. And therefore, I would say good evaluations take a long time. You need to think, you need to start thinking about them very early, and then the chance to be successful is much higher. And clearly, I would love to also say, if I would be with you now, I would say, okay, if you have any questions, come to me also during the coffee break or during lunch. So since that is not possible, I'm also happy to take any questions by email. So if there's anything, in my slides that caught your interest, or if you have any questions about that, feel free to contact me. And now I'm also happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Marco. Please, Anne, come also to the stage. We have time for a couple of questions to Marco and Anne. So if you would like to ask, then raise your hand and we will bring you the microphone.
Thank you very much. My name is Michel van Smolenburg from UWV of the Netherlands. I have a question for both of you. First, Professor Marco Caliendo, about a randomized experiment. I have a question about this. When you, for example, by coincidence, have a larger proportion of people with a relevant characteristic in your experiment group. So it's not selection bias, but, well, it's relevant and it's disproportional. Would you correct for this?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. Of course, so of course, like in an ideal experiment, you would not really get that. But sometimes it happens by, if we randomize, then by luck or by chance, this can be. And then I would really say, depending on the magnitude of the difference, then you would need some post-experimental stratification methods that you use. So yes, I would say if it's really out of balance, then you probably need to, then you will need to correct for it. Because basically, in a sense, if you can't achieve like a perfect balancing with the experiment, then you might introduce a selection bias that it's not planned.
Thank you, thank you. And another question for Anne. The last slide, it was a bit difficult for me to interpret this one. I was wondering if, when there is a skills obstacle, it's correlated very oftenly with other problems, so it's a multi-problem situation, or is it harder to diagnose people with skills obstacles?
Mm-hmm. So in this case, what you saw was so about 50% of people who received active labor market policies, so people who had definitely a skill obstacle, but had also some other obstacle potentially, or some of them maybe even 3 or 4 obstacles, but they all had at least skill obstacle. So out of them who got a policy, 50% got a skill-related policy. And people who had definitely a health obstacle, but also might have had some skill obstacles, some other obstacles. Out of them also 50% got a skill-related active labor policy and so on. So it was very similar. I think there was minor differences. So of course, if you expect that people who have skill-related obstacles, for sure, maybe some others, the share of them getting a skill-related active labor policy would be higher, but in this case, we didn't see it. So of course, there are several reasons, potentially. For example, whether the data was not sufficient, what we had to use. Of course, there was quite a lot of dimensions, the qualification data, language data, and a bit beyond that, but also, of course, not covering all kind of skills, all kind of licenses that people might have. So whether there's something about that. But it can be also, of course, the policy advice that we should be even more mindful about people with skill obstacles, that maybe the coverage of these policies are not at the moment sufficient. Well, in this case, in this year, so maybe it has already changed, but yeah, that's what the data analysis showed.
Thank you.
Bonjour. Alors, je voudrais d'abord faire une petite réflexion par
Thank you. I'd first of all,
un peu Elton Mayo dans les études.
I would like to react to what you Professor Marco Calenda said, and Michael who mentioned about the General Electric conducted surveys using the same methodology already back in 1920s. I wanted to ask you about statistical profiling. Whether it is possible to use this type of profiling in the effect evaluation. Can it be used as a tool for evaluation when we assess how a job seeker has been integrated into the labor market?
Okay, thank you. I mean, That's an excellent question. Also, like the General Electric experiment in 1920, which was basically one of the earliest, which also failed. Because in that experiment, basically researchers went into a plant and tried to change the work environment and see how that affects the work performance of people. But the thing is, like, the workers felt under monitoring and behaved very differently, no matter what the experimentalists did. And so basically, in the literature, this is one of the things which goes down as quite a failure in experimental evaluations, because the experimentalists they changed the behavior of the individuals they were surveying. And therefore, this is this, of course, we always have to be very careful not to do that. But talking about profiling and whether we can use that, I would say yes, but remember, a good profiling needs a very good evidence-based evaluation before, because only, as Anna said, only if we know which program works for whom, then we can also give a good profiling advice. Yeah, so if we know, for example, that training programs work for, let's say, males or females with certain set of qualifications or problems on the labor market, then when another individual with these with these characteristics comes into the agency, then we can give a good profiling advice. Yeah, so I think profiling is the next step after we have already gathered information on the impacts of different programs.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
I have here on the back row. Elina Kallas is here from Estonian Unemployment Insurance Fund, and I have a question for Professor Caliendo. Thank you very much for your presentation. So my question is, what is your opinion on using systematic reviews and meta-analysis for creating or supporting to create labor market policies when the data is missing, incomplete, or not available? What is your opinion? Thank you.
This is some of the situations where you also have to be a bit opportunistic. I would say, of course, if you're in a situation where you can have data for your country for the situation that you are analyzing, then that would be the first best solution. If this, for any other reason, is not possible, then you have to think about what's the second best solution. And then maybe a meta-analysis, of programs that were run in different but similar countries in similar time periods could be helpful. Yeah, and in general, what we also like to do is a meta-analysis could also be that you look at the training programs in all OECD countries and then see whether you can find any common effects across the countries, and see whether we can learn anything more general that's not country specific. And therefore, I think also a meta-analysis in that direction can be very helpful. But in general, I would say if you introduce a new program in a specific country, then without going in there directly and also doing a counterfactual impact evaluation in the given institutional setting, it will be difficult to come up with really quantitative effects that you can say the program has raised employment probabilities by a certain amount or income by a certain amount. That will be very, very hard to do with any meta-analysis that you mentioned.
So now it's time for the break for coffee and leg stretching, and then you will continue with parallel sessions, and after that we will meet here at 12:30 to do the conclusions of the session. So have a nice time.